Morning, I'll call the meeting to order. Apologize for being a few minutes delayed. As the first item, may we have the roll call?
Yes. Director Bond.
Here.
Director Amen.
Here.
Director Whiston. Director Andrew.
Here.
Director Old.
Here.
Director Mason.
Here.
Director Mayer. Director Miller.
Here.
Director Luce. I'll come back for those online, maybe. Director St. John.
Here.
Director Wiersbicki.
Here.
Director Dodge. Director Dodge. We'll come back. She might be virtual.
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm
right.
here.
Thank you. Director Driehaus.
Here.
Director Hohaddle. Director Tyler Lee. We'll come back. Director Mattia. Absent. Director Piccirilli.
Here.
Director Greta Johnson.
Here.
Director Silac.
Here.
Director Gregoire.
Here.
Director Kidd.
Here.
Director Portman.
Here, homesick.
Oh, no. Director Radcliffe. Director Royson.
Here.
Director Smitherman.
He is online. We're having trouble getting him converted over.
Okay.
We'll note that he's here then.
Director Baker.
Here.
Director Claymeyer. I think he's coming virtually. Then we have another Johnson, Director Terry Johnson. Director Plummer. Okay, anyone else on Zoom that I missed?
Okay, I show that we have 22 present. All classifications are present. So therefore, we have a formal meeting that can conduct business. So again, thank you for coming to the April meeting. And before I get started, I do want to welcome and note that we do have two new directors, Tom Winston and Senator Terry Johnson will be new to the board. And I don't think we have either here with us today. Or you, oh, I'm sorry, Tom. I thought it said something different. Tom, would you like to say anything?
No, just a pleasure. I'm taking Jeff Fick's place. I'm a pharmacist by profession, but have served in elected office for about 40 years. I tell people I'm in the most trusted and least trusted profession.
And that would be Fairfield County. Wonderful.
Yes.
Pardon me?
Yes. Marl. He was.
Okay, well, my pleasure. Well, you have big shoes to fill. Jeff was a wonderful participant at our meetings. So again, thank you. And we wish Commissioner Fix, of course, the best. He's been wonderful. We also want to congratulate Evan Kleinmeyer, by the way, who's just had an addition to the family. And I think most of us can tell you those were the best years of our lives. Sorry, raising our infants. So it's wonderful for him. But I also like, before I jump to our agenda, I also want to welcome our guests who are here. So thank you very, very much. And of course, welcoming those who are here with us virtually. And again, sometimes it's difficult for us to interact virtually, but those who have questions, please email info@oneohiofoundation.com. And we'll do the best we can to integrate any questions you might have. Also, please note if you have questions about the grant program, those questions should go to the grant inbox, which is apply@oneohiofoundation.com. So the first item on the business would be then approval of the agenda packet that you received. And again, we're also using, many of us are using the onboard system. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion approved.
By Director Amen and Director Keith. Easier for me to say Keith.
I get it.
I will know, though, I apologize, there is one item we won't be touched upon, that is just the scoring rubric. So with that one change, we have the motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. And has everybody had an opportunity to read the minutes of the last meeting? It was in the board packet. And again, could I have a motion to approve the minutes of the past board meeting
Moved.
by Jeanette, and I couldn't hear the online.
Mike Roizen.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Royson. Is there any discussion of the minutes? Hearing none, then all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and the motion carries. The next item of business is probably one of the most important topics we discuss on a monthly basis, and that's the personal story. And we are blessed to have Director Greta Meyer from the Region 14 to share this month's personal story.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and good morning, everyone. As we do at each board meeting, we're all going to hear the story of an Ohioan affected by the opioid epidemic, one of the 7 counties that I'm honored to represent in Region 14. Today's story, though, is a difficult one, the tragic loss of a daughter on the cusp of adulthood. The lesson for all of us, though, is the same, the importance of providing adequate resources to help those struggling with addiction. Angela Rahman is a member of the Mental Health Recovery Board serving Warren and Clinton counties. Almost 7 years ago, her daughter, Amber, was 11 days shy of her 22nd birthday. She relapsed and died of an overdose in her grandmother's basement. Amber had already been in rehab facilities 3 times. She was a good student in high school, a hard worker, and was attending classes at Wright State University. But as her mother relates the story, signs had been missed. Angela didn't realize that Amber had been smoking cigarettes and using marijuana as a high school student. In the summer between high school and college, Angela believes Amber began using hard drugs, possibly in reaction to a bad breakup. Angela regrets not recognizing signs of a problem. Coming from a family where drug use wasn't an issue, Angela said she had no clue what was happening. Eventually, Amber's college roommate alerted Angela to the problem, and Amber went into rehab, though she acknowledged she didn't realize she was addicted until after her first 2 attempts. Like many people, she felt she could handle doing drugs and getting away with it. But before she died, Amber seemed as if she were doing well. She was living with her grandmother who was recovering from breast cancer. Angela doesn't know why Amber relapsed, where she got the drugs that killed her, or if anyone was with her at the time she used them for the last time. Angela suffered greatly after Amber's death, as did Angela's 2 younger daughters. Angela continues to battle depression and feel the tremendous loss from Amber's death. But she has also made it her mission to speak about Amber and addiction. As an African-American woman, she says that especially important because the Black community doesn't always talk about mental health and personal tragedy. Angela wants the board to remember the obvious. Addiction can affect anyone, regardless of their color, socioeconomic status, or level of education. She also emphasizes the need for treatment and safe places to recover, and how important it is that those resources are widely known and available. By day, Angela works as a city planner, community development professional. In her job, she sees firsthand the harm that lack of housing options can cause to those aiming for long-term recovery. She is an advocate for funding and need-based projects to address these problems. In sharing her story, Angela would like to remind the board that everyone deserves help and opportunities to recover, regardless of how many stints in rehab it takes. Most importantly, everyone deserves to be treated with respect because where there is life, there is always hope. We thank Angela for sharing her story with us. Please join me in acknowledging the pain she's experienced and the grace she has shown as she turns her personal tragedy into a way to help others. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Greta. So now we'll go into committee reports, and the first one will be of the executive committee. We've been in discussions regarding the conflict of interest policy. At the last executive committee, we covered, again, several important topics. And we do want to provide you an update with the conflict of interest policy as we operationalize our long-standing conflicts of interest. With that, I'll turn it over to our attorney, Andy Ferris.
Hi, thank you. I think one of the key words, and it's kind of something that Alicia coined during the discussions that we've had over really the last couple of months, is operationalizing our conflict of interest policy. And that's really kind of putting a process behind the policy. And as you may recall, when this board was organized and its governing documents were put in place, one of the key elements was a conflict of interest policy. And that policy was based by and large on the Internal Revenue Service's model conflict of interest policy for exempt organizations. It's a good policy. It covers a lot, but the real hard work in terms of identifying and mitigating conflicts of interest is really educational and having the resources that we need to understand what a conflict is and how to mitigate that conflict or eliminate the conflict or eliminate the situation that would give rise to the conflict. So with that in mind, and you're going to be hearing a lot over the next couple of months about conflicts of interest training, ethics training. But with that in mind, we wanted to put together a quick guide to avoid conflicts of interest. And that's should also be identifying conflicts of interest. I'm not going to read the quick guide word for word, but we start off by identifying the universe of people that the conflict of interest policy applies to. And that is, this board, the regional boards, their delegates, regional grant reviewers, the One Ohio expert panel, the staff. So it's all encompassing. And I think we had, what are our most recent numbers just about people that we've identified? Yes, so 350? 315 people that we've identified right now that fall under that umbrella. And we looked at a lot of different documents discussing conflicts of interest. The document that I felt was provided kind of the best guidance is from the United States Department of Justice. And it defines a conflict of interest policy as actual, potential, or perceived. And a conflict occurs when a person has an actual or apparent duty or loyalty to more than one person, group, organization, and the competing duties or loyalties may result in actions adverse to one or both parties. And the important part of this definition I've highlighted is a conflict of interest exists even if no unethical, improper, or illegal act results from it. And that gets to the point of we want to identify these conflicts. We want to mitigate these conflicts. The goal of this policy is not to toss applications out. It's to police our process about approving applications, and it's to police the behavior of the 315 people. We break these conflicts down into first an actual conflict of interest. And those are pretty easy to identify. I think we all understand those. An actual conflict of interest occurs when a decision or action would compromise a duty to a party without taking immediate appropriate action to eliminate the conflict. And I've given 3 examples there. I'm not going to go through those examples because they're pretty straightforward. But then I want to get into a potential conflict of interest. A potential conflict of interest may exist if one party has a relationship, affiliation, or other interest that could, and could is the operative word there, create an inappropriate influence if the person is called upon to make decisions or recommendations that would affect one or more of those relationships, affiliations, or interests. And the example that I give here is when one party serves in a volunteer capacity for another party, such relationship has the potential to, but does not necessarily create a conflict of interest, depending on the nature of the relationship between the two parties and other factors. So the example I give here is Stanley, a board member of One Ohio, volunteers as a peer mentor for a local recovery facility that may be a direct or indirect grant recipient of One Ohio. So the point here, and my note is, there's the potential for a conflict of interest, and we need to look at that potential and we need to investigate it to bring judgment to bear about whether or not a conflict exists. In this circumstance, we would be looking at what Stanley actually does as a volunteer and whether or not he has any ability or his role could influence the organization, or is he merely just a person who volunteers his time and doesn't partake in decisions about governing and policy? So all of these identified conflicts, and we're going to have a lot of them, we need to peel back the onion and really bring some judgment to bear about whether or not it's an actual conflict, a potential conflict, and what action needs to be taken to mitigate that conflict. Obviously, in the decision-making environment, the easiest way to mitigate a conflict is for the person who has the conflict or the organization that has the conflict, and I'll get to that further, recuses themselves from deliberation and voting on certain issues.
Mr. Ferris.
Yeah.
When you say we need to decide, who is the we?
So it would be this board, the regional boards, the grant-making review committees. It's all of those folks that fall in our staff. So it's
I guess when you're saying we need to make a decision if there's a conflict, is that as counsel for the board, or will the board make that decision?
Depending on the level and the degree of the conflict, that resolution could happen at the regional board level. It could happen at the grant-making committee level. It could rise, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it could rise to the legal ad hoc committee, which will be tasked to deal with conflicts that can't otherwise easily be resolved. So we're going to have a hierarchy of resources that you can call upon to make those determinations. And I think that also brings up a very good point as part of this
Optimization.
As part of the process, people are going to self-identify through a questionnaire conflicts that they have. We are going to train people about conflicts because there may be a circumstance, and likely will be a circumstance, where you fill out your questionnaire, you identify your conflicts, but then you go to a meeting and something that you don't think about as a conflict rises to the level of a conflict. So we're going to go through the process of identifying, and then we're going to provide resources on how you would deal with mitigating a conflict.
Andy, I assume the regions would need to sign the conflict of interest policy before they apply for a grant, or their
Yes, so
regions apply for a grant.
in terms of process in the Akoya Go system, and as part of being a regional board member, a regional grant reviewer, a member of this board, a staff member, they will be signing those documents and agreeing to take part in the training. Any other questions? So then we break down conflicts into an individual conflict of interest, which I think is self-explanatory. It's a conflict that's eternal to the individual, whether they be a volunteer, or whether they be a staff member. And then the one that's not necessarily so clear, and I'd like to talk about, is an organizational conflict of interest. And I think that particularly with respect to One Ohio at the regional level, we could find ourselves with the organizational conflict of interest, which occurs at the organizational level where there's no direct benefit to an individual, but there may be a conflict between the organization that the individual serves on and another organization. So a grantee's, the example I give is a grantee's objectivity in carrying out the grant is impaired or compromised due to competing duties or loyalties. Organization D, a recipient of private funds dedicated to harm reduction, applies for funds from One Ohio to carry out recovery counseling. So we have this kind of, you can't serve two masters, and that may rise to the level of a conflict. And I give, some other examples there that you can read. So then I have additional note about local elected officials and local government agencies applying for funding. If a local government agency that the local elected official oversees is applying, this conflict will be flagged and a rider will be put on the grant application as it goes through our grant process to identify the conflict. Again, we're just flagging those conflicts as something that needs to be further investigated to make sure that they don't rise to a conflict that would impair the grant-making process. Why should we be concerned about conflicts? I start with the general and go to kind of the specific, but the first is adverse public relations. Those of you who've been on this board for, the last 2 years understand the public relations challenge that we've had getting to the point where we're getting money out the door. Could create a public perception of corruption, even though there's no corruption or no untoward activity. May alienate stakeholders in the public, potential to give rise to civil liability and disrupt the grant process. Once we start going through this process, there are people who are not going to be funded, and those people may, seek some sort of recourse. And to the extent that we can eliminate and mitigate conflicts of interest, it's going to put us in a much better position in defending ourselves against really the unforeseen legal action that may come. And then finally, conflicts of interest can give rise to criminal liability. So there's a whole host of reasons why we should all be focused on conflicts of interest. In the course of the last 2 weeks, we've also, in conjunction with the executive committee, determined that we need to have a process at the board level to assist the regions and the board in dealing with conflicts of interest. The recommendation that has been developed is that the ad hoc legal committee would be the group that would receive those conflicts and evaluate those conflicts and determine the best way to mitigate those conflicts. Now, Don, if you want to say anything. Okay. Finally, I end with giving you some resources. We've got the Recovery Foundation's resources, which are the conflicts of interest policy itself, the One Ohio transparency policy, the One Ohio grant policy, which we will discuss further in the meeting, which includes reference to conflicts of interest, and then sending any issues to the Conflict of Interest Committee at the foundation. Finally, we also have the Ohio Ethics Committee, and we've got the Ohio Ethics Commission, and we have the Ohio Ethics Training. And I know some of you who are government officials also from time to time use your county prosecutor as a resource, and I think you should continue to do that. But we're just listing the resources that we are going to be relying on at the board level. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Who is our representative on the Ethics Commission? Who is the point person?
The Ohio Ethics Commission.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Tony Bledsoe's over the legislature, Paul Nick is over the counties, so I'm just wondering who is going to be our point person if we have any particular questions.
We can follow up with
Okay.
that, I think,
My gut would tell me that it would be somebody at the Attorney General's office.
because we're, as a nonprofit.
Yeah, as a nonprofit foundation, that's who we would look to. And they have, as you know, they've been actively involved in assisting us with a number of legal issues.
Thanks.
So when you talk about training requirement, I'm assuming they will be required for everybody on this board as well as everybody from the regional board. Is that correct?
That entire 315 that we've identified, and that number keeps ticking up. So, you know, we will identify those people and they will be required to follow the process with respect to the documentation, questionnaire, and the training.
And I can add a little bit of color to the process. As you see on the slide here, so we've listed that all volunteers and staff, to Andy's point, including that global 315 folks, will go through the related party questionnaire, will attest to completing the Ohio ethics training or some other like training in the process, and then disclose and recuse themselves as needed throughout the entire process. And it's really that duty of the individual to recognize maybe they forgot something and then they see something that they support this process by kind of detailing that. One of the things that we were able to do in our grants portal system is as you get your username and password to access the system, for those out in the community, the process for the board will look a little different. But for the majority of folks of that 315, as soon as you enter into the system, that is your first steps. As you get your username and password, you then fill out the conflicts of interest forms and the related party questionnaire and then the attestations to that training. And so that'll be our way to get that information in front of all the folks that'll be a part of the process. It'll be through that grant portal.
I want to thank Andy for going over that very important report with us. Now, next month, you'll be receiving the related party questionnaire that will give us the opportunity to make necessary disclosures, which will satisfy the auditor's requirements. If you have any individual or organizational questions, I would ask that you direct those directly to Andy, and then he can reply. Moving forward, we'll be partnering with the One Ohio Ad Hoc Legal Committee that can address any specific concerns on the conflict of interest. Again, any more questions from the floor on this important topic? Well then, hearing none, so I'll move on further. We'll have at the annual meeting, we'll have the nomination process. If you take a look at the MOU and the bylaws, the chairman of the committee under section 403 will be the standing committee for nominations. That's Julie Amon from the Personnel Committee, Tom Gregoire from Grants Oversight, Evan Claymire from the Audit and Finance, and then I'm the chairman of the Investments Committee. So that will be the committee. So please connect with this committee if you have any interest in serving or nominating a person. If you nominate, please ask them first. But with that, next, I'd like to turn over to the Grants Oversight Committee for a report. Tom?
Morning, everybody. Had as fun an eclipse as I had. First of all, I want to thank our board members, our committee. You know, we're meeting twice a month. We're doing a lot of work, and thank the staff, Sarah and Alicia, and the work we've done. This morning, our final approval on a grants policy. We had written this policy a few years ago, but as we got closer to the live and had the nice touch of Alicia and Sarah, we needed to think through a lot of things. More specifically, we have done that. Included in that, we've clarified the role of staff. We didn't have any staff when we wrote this, but we clarified the role of that. You've heard from our attorney how we continue to further this, taking a conflict of interest policy and turning it into procedures, and it is complicated, and we continue to work on that. But our first, we do have an action item for you. As I said, we do approve the grants policy. You have that in front of you and, with this forward to the board.
And does everybody have a copy of it then?
It will be in their onboard system.
The onboard.
We can pull it up.
Yeah, if you could pull it up, just, is this the one we made changes to this morning?
Cool.
Yeah, and some changes were made at the committee this morning to that on board, in defining, how board members are subsequently, positions are filled upon vacating of a director's position.
Yeah, and so in front of you all on the screen here, it'll be hard to see, so I'll kind of spell that out. As Tom mentioned, we went through and really defined the roles of staff, the grant oversight committee, the regional boards, the regional grant review committee, the expert panel, all the folks that really are crucial to making this process work. We've worked really closely with the grants oversight committee to make edits and changes and reflect those here in this year's update to the policy. The one change that our chair is referencing is the composition of the grant oversight committee. In the original policy, it detailed that these changes would happen at the annual board meeting. The change to what's in your onboard is up on the screen here. The board of directors will confirm the membership of the grant oversight committee at each annual board meeting. And as needed, the chair of the grant oversight committee may fill vacancies as detailed in the code of regulations. So that would be the change from what you have in your onboard system versus what you see today.
Any questions about this? I remember my Robert Tools on this comes with a committee motion. Requires a second.
Yes, so Tom has made the motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
By Director Amen. Any discussion on the topic?
There was one other change that the grants committee made.
Yeah, thank you. The second change, appreciate that call out. I've highlighted here on the screen. Unused regional grant funds shall be returned to the foundation and shall be retained for that region. So if we have an applicant who for some reason does not use all of the funds for that application, those funds come back to the foundation and then are applied back to that region's account.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, Jeanette. Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and the motion carries.
Just a few more updates for us. Again, thank you to the committee and the staff. That's been a big lift. Our next task is we're working on scoring the rubrics. We've had some brief discussions about that. We have a whole meeting devoted to it in a couple of weeks. Just incorporating rubrics that work for the regions and for us at large. So we'll likely bring that back to you at our next meeting. And then Alicia, you have a few more updates about what's happening.
Certainly. Thank you, Tom. And before I jump in any specific updates, I want to recognize that we do have 2 new staff members who are joining the team, but more importantly, that will be helping us as we move forward. And that is Laura Spires and Andy Jessen are both here. We're really excited to have them and we'll be working with you to get through this really important work. So with that, I wanted to just also give an update around some of the things that we are seeing in the grants portal and the grant system. As you know, registration opened on March 4th. And at our last meeting, we talked about 100 organizations went into that portal and started that registration process. Well, since then, we've had a significant increase in those and we're over 450 organizations who have accessed the portal and growing. It's really hard to keep track of the numbers because I think they change minute to minute. But we're really excited to see the participation from across the state in this area. There are applicants or registrants in every region. And we will be reaching out to those regions, which there are only 2 at this point that have less than 10 folks that are interested in working with the region. So we're really excited about these numbers. Just for a point of reference, we still have the majority of those organizations that are in our system with budgets less than 500,000. Really, those small community organizations are really showing up in our process. The next category is really those organizations that have budgets from 1 million to 5 million. And so again, really excited to see the types of organizations that come in. The tax status for the majority of our applicants are nonprofit. Over 60% of those who have entered in our system are community nonprofits and are verified nonprofits. So we're excited for that. And we think that this information is really helpful to understand who we're reaching. The last point that I think we're going to be talking a lot about as a team and working with Laura and our regional boards and all of you is that we are seeing about nearly half of all of the applicants are really thinking about multi-region applications. And so that is something that we'll think about how we operationalize. I know many have talked about what we would do in our regions with this work, but what we're seeing is about half of those that are coming in our system are not applying to just one region. And so how we operationalize that is our task for the next couple weeks, but we'll be working with you to figure that out. So with that, the only other information that I wanted to share broadly in hopes that you all could help us is a couple updates about our training. So this past Monday, some of you may have joined us. We had over 350 folks on the line with us to do our first grant application training. We thought that went well. We got a lot of good questions, a lot of good feedback for us to take back into consideration. This Friday is the second of those. So if you have community folks who missed that first training, or if your regional board members would like to just know what we're talking about and how we're answering some of the questions, that next opportunity is April 12th. I will say that we did record this first meeting and we'll record Friday's meeting. Those recordings will be available to all of you next week. So that if you miss that opportunity, you can catch it via the web. So we're really excited about that. Up next, I think a lot of the questions that are coming from the communities are really focused on how do we meet this evidence-based requirement. I think folks have thought about evidence-based in different ways and want to make sure they understand how we're thinking about it, how it's been kind of operationalized and thought about in the application, in the RFP, and how the regions will be, how the expert panel will be really reviewing for that. And so to support that conversation, we will be hosting our next Impact Academy session on April 15th at 9 a.m. In partnership with the expert panel, as well as in partnership with the implementation science team at the with the Ohio Healing Community Study. Many have heard about that Healing Community Study work. They are going to go through, in partnership with us, just some general items around how do you identify evidence that supports the abatement strategies you're working on, what tools are out there, examples of programs and services that align with strategies so that they can kind of give folks some ideas about how to approach these questions in the application, and then really making sure that they know that there's a ton of resources out included in our quick guide to evidence. There's a list of compendiums where folks could take a look at, well, how does my work align with an evidence-based strategy, or, maybe what's more recent discussion around the strategy that I've been doing for a while and I want to evolve. And so we're really excited about those conversations and really can go from there. So those are just our 2 quick updates.
Good. Thank you very much for today's updates. And again, welcome to Laura and Andy. We're happy to have you join our staffs. The next item on the agenda is the Personnel Committee report by Director Amen.
All right, good morning. The committee met on April 4th at 3 p.m. with staff and members present. Alicia reported on the new hires. She mentioned Laura Spires, who's the grant administration, Lori Cockrell, who will be her executive assistant starting on April 15th, and Andy Jessen, who is the partnership and outreach liaison, giving us a staff total of 6 individuals at this time. We had discussions on what is the organizational structure looking like at this point? What could it look like in the future if we do get a few more individuals onboarded? So we reviewed that and answered those questions. We had discussion of the personnel policy to get a bare bones copy to our employees who are currently operating without a personnel policy manual. So, and we'll have some further development on that later, but right now we want to get the bare bones legal in place so that our employees kind of have a feel for what the expectations are. We did have some discussion on remote versus in-person work and some further discussion on how that will all work too. Then we discussed making the One Ohio Foundation a recovery-friendly workplace. And we'll be looking to templates from New Hampshire and Hamilton County to see what that might look like for our organization moving forward. Our next meeting will be May 2nd at 3 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, next we go to our financial report. But before I turn this over to Jim, I want to share an update regarding our investment committee. Given the importance of the investment work, we will continue to look for board members who are willing to serve. But we've been remarkably shy of volunteers, so we'll be sending a notice or a letter to the regional boards asking for volunteers. I think it's quite possible in the 19 regions, we might have several people who have the investment background. So again, this is again another opportunity for each of you to just reach out to Alicia or to me if you're in, or to Jim if you're interested. But I'll be reaching out to the regional boards. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to Jim, who's going to go over some critical information about our March financials and also provide an update on estimates of payments from the pharmaceutical industry.
Thank you, Chair. So today I'll provide an update to the 24 grants and operating budget. A quick run through of our current cash position. Talk a little bit about the updated estimates from the opioid settlements. We'll be working to deep dive over the next 6 months to work with the Audit and Finance Committee and the Investment Committee, deliver a series of presentations and discussions that will lead up to the an annual allocation process and the 2025 budget proposal. So our operating budget, we continue to be frugal with this. We expect the funds that you've entrusted to the foundation. We expect spending to increase as we start building more of this infrastructure to support these $50 million in grants. So right now we're running around $80,000 a month. And we expect as we build the infrastructure that will increase a little bit. Small, but the grant budget is really starting to pick up a little bit as we hire grant staff and we go through Go and grant software development, training and presentations that Sarah and team have been doing. It should be noted here that the combination of the grant and operating budget is less than 5% of this whole budget. We're trying to keep the administrative cost down. It's less than 5% of the budget. Moving on to the cash report, there's a couple of things of interest on the cash report. You've seen this before. One thing I want to bring your attention to is since inception, which we received our first funds a year ago, right? First funds came in a year ago. Since the inception of that, we have earned $2.9 million in interest over the last year. You remember back last spring, the board voted to earn the highest possible interest that we could. That be 100% safe. So currently we're invested in FDIC insured accounts and treasury insured accounts. Earning above market rates. So we've been able to ride this inverted curve where short-term rates are better than long-term rates. We expect that will, if we move closer to the election, that will cut rates a couple times. So that will probably change here in the future. We'll be working with the investment committee and strategies for that. In March, the foundation received, you can see in the middle there where it says distributor year 18 prepayment. So the opioid companies could pick an option, choose an option to prepay year 18 early at the present market, with the present value of that payment. So they pay this 3.2 million for year 18 here in mid-March. Those are payments from Cencora and Cardinal Health. So those two decided to pay us early. It changes year 18 from 21 million to 11 million. Right? And not only did the foundation get prepaid, but the locals got prepaid, and the state got prepaid. Everybody got prepaid. So the locals should have received that payment. And we turn over to, this one's really small, but I think you have handouts. Right. So this, you remember this, we last August, we put a version out of this. It really hasn't changed a whole lot, right, since then, except for, you can see the 3.2 million prepayment, right? And the decrease in year 2038 to 11 million. We expect that settlement payments will be received for most of these things in the June, July time period. And so that's when we would expect to see our annual payments. There really isn't any word right now on the other 5 settlements, although I think they're still going through local courts, right? So there's a local court component of this. And so we should see kind of a bulking of payments similar to we saw with distributor and J&J for year 1 and 2, and then year 3 came 3 months later. I expect to see something like that as they get the payments on schedule. We don't have any information on Purdue Pharma, or Kroger, or
Friday.
Friday. So are there any questions?
I do have a question. Obviously, we allocate year 1 and year 2 funding. Do we have a projected timeframe when we're going to discuss about year 3 funding?
Which year?
Year 3, which is our, where we. Yes.
Well, just as I'll say a reminder, so in July, we look to have a retreat. And it was pushed to July because we are anticipating a small change of directors at the annual meeting or shortly thereafter based on the regional selection. So in July is when we'll be making some long-term decisions and big decisions regarding again, how much money would be supported to the regional level, how much for other type programs such as statewide or multi-regional. Again, that will be determined after the strategic planning in July. Does that answer? And that'll be determined by you, by all of you.
Thank you.
I think this is an annual process, so I think we should work towards an annual process. Like what an MOU kind of speaks to that a little bit. Like take these things into consideration when you're investing. One thing I would note is money that's allocated to regions needs to be invested in a protected fund, so that you deliver those funds. So that's what we did with 51 million. We made sure those were FDIC insured so that any market downturns wouldn't affect these funds. So that's something to think about in your allocations. How far in advance you allocate and how much money you can make in these funds. Yeah, I think although
Okay. Do we need, I know we need a motion for the unaudited.
Dr. Rosen?
Are there any
Do-
questions? Go ahead.
you have a
Do we
question?
have dates for the July retreat?
We are working now to put together a date for you guys. We'll talk, Chair, we can talk and hopefully get some dates out in the next week or so.
Dr. Michael, she said within the next week we'll get some
Yes.
dates out. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, here's my question. Are you going to cover the unaudited financial statement? We'll just do a motion to approve both at the time.
Yeah, that was that.
Yeah, I'm not if I did.
Yeah.
No, not this.
Okay.
Next month, we'll do the Audit Finance Committee has.
Okay. Okay, very good then.
They haven't approved this.
Okay.
So,
Do we have, oh, good. That's fine. Do we have a motion to approve the investment report then
So moved.
by Greta and second by Larry? Any discussion on it then? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And the motion carries. So again, we, at this point, will be wrapping up the meeting. Again, our next meeting is May 8th. And that's where we'll decide on the slate of officers and the membership of the executive committee. And again, I just might remind you, again, if you have opportunities to volunteer for the investment committee, because probably by mid to late summer is when we should then really move from our short-term investments towards a longer term for a portion, that portion as decided by strategic planning. So hearing no other business, is there a motion to adjourn?
I will.
Mercy. And is there a second?
Second.
And by Commissioner Director Amen, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, could you, minutes reflect that I've been present via Zoom. I came in 2 minutes late. Thanks.
And I want to say, I saw you come on a little while ago, and also Representative Plummer was in the room also. So thank you, Judge. Meeting's adjourned.